I still have a hard time following some of what he says, because it just seems like not only does atheism make no sense, sometimes atheism makes no sense. It just seems like it's a lot of scattered thoughts, but we're going to try to follow some of these things up. The first thing it seems like he opens up by saying is that atheism is not content. Therefore, we didn't, there's no way for atheists to have said something about slavery or whatever. That really doesn't make sense. And all that, when we look at what is happening in atheism today, one of the things that we'll see, what Joseph said is that it's not a collection of people. Atheism is not a collection of people. What's very interesting about that is right now there's hundreds of conferences all around the world that are happening that are atheistic conferences where they're coming together as a collection of people. Atheists are launching radio stations all around the world. In fact, a lot of atheist groups are applying for nonprofit status. A lot of them are getting it, by the way. And here they are organizing themselves. In fact, it's to the point to where, Sam Harris says, look, we got to be careful about even calling ourselves atheists, because we're falling into the same things that we've criticized about religion. Atheism is becoming a religion all on its own. And so this idea that somehow atheism is not a collection of people, it just doesn't seem to go with what's actually happening in the world. Then Joseph kind of gets on this deal. He kind of makes a point that seems reasonable, because he gets talking about morals, and he says, the atheist can be just as moral, as the Christian. I don't have to be a Christian, or I don't have to be a believer in some God to have morals. Joseph is actually correct. To be sure, the moral law that I mentioned earlier doesn't only exist for those who believe it exists for all people. The case can't be made against Joseph that since he doesn't believe there's an ultimate objective moral law that he can't obey it. It would be ludicrous to think that only believers could adhere to such an integral part of our being. For even the Bible says that God has put the laws of His law on the hearts of men. Believer or not, everyone is aware, at least to some degree, of the moral law and has the potential to obey it. So I'm not saying that Joseph is immoral because he's an atheist or that he can't be moral. The problem arises for Joseph, however, because he's kind of putting two things together, and one of them deals with moral ontology, the other one deals with moral epistemology. And the difference between these two words are very similar. Moral ontology deals with the reality of morals and actually having a foundation for it or having something that supports it. Whereas moral epistemology just deals with knowing morals. I'm not saying that Joseph doesn't have a case as an atheist for moral epistemology, meaning that he can't grasp or know what morals are or that he can't obey morals. What I'm saying is that Joseph doesn't have a case for moral ontology. That is to say that he doesn't have a foundation for his morals. Where, I would ask, does Joseph get his morals from? If he says there's objective morals and that we're not all just doing our own thing and that whatever is wrong in some cultures is wrong in all cultures, where do these morals come from? So that would be a question I would have for him. Then he goes on this deal and he comes back up with this thing on you can't just pick your favorite God, but I describe several qualities and characteristics about God. He says, well, how do you know that these qualities and characteristics are about that God? And I gave some of the reasons. The reason that God must be supernatural is because He created nature, time, and space. He must be powerful to have created that. I mean, this isn't something to where we have to look to the Bible to deduce this. If we're assuming that there is a Creator God, these characteristics are very easily understood and deduced. He must be eternal since He created time and he needs to be self-existent. He has to be omnipresent since He created the space and isn't limited by it. He must be immaterial because He transcends space and physical material. So these things, if we just look, the deal about morals, our God has to be moral because He created morals. And I don't see why Joseph can't see that there are certain qualities that if there is a Creator God, that we could assume certain things about Him based on that. He goes back to this deal on slavery, and he starts saying, well, how come God didn't give the different rules and stuff like that? Well, we put ourselves in a position where we start trying to be God, or we start trying to say, well, if I was God, this is what I would have done. Or, if I would have been the one inspiring the Bible, this is the way I would have done it. The fact is, whenever we look at slavery and even the abolition of slavery, we look in Britain and we see people like William Wilberforce, who was one of the leading people that fought the cause against slavery. And people like this even gave their lives in the name of Christ to get rid of slavery. We look in the U.S. and we see people like John Woolman, and he fought against slavery. So I just don't get this whole idea. And not only that, but even though there aren't explicit commands, that we aren't to have slaves or whatever like that in those times to those cultures in the Bible. There are very clear things about how you are to love one another, how you are to carry one another's burdens, how one ought not to think of himself more highly than even other people. So to say that the Bible doesn't teach against slavery, I would say is just an assumption and is not really grounded. So in conclusion, I started out with two main contentions in tonight's debate. The first being that there are sound rational arguments for theism. The second being there are no good rational arguments for atheism. It seems that the atheistic model presented here tonight that kind of says that we came from an accident, there wasn't a designer or a purposeful God behind it. It seems that we would have to believe that something came from nothing, that life came from non-life, that personal from the impersonal, minds from the mindless, order from the orderless, morality from the immoral or the non-moral, information without a sender, and truth from an accident. Friends, I guess I just don't have enough faith to be an atheist. In contrast, I presented 6 arguments for theism. God makes sense of the origin of the universe. Atheism doesn't. God makes sense of the fine-tuning of the universe. Atheism doesn't. God makes sense of the origin of first life. Atheism doesn't. God makes sense of objective morals and values and duties. Atheism doesn't. God makes sense of Jesus Christ, His life, death, and resurrection. Atheism doesn't. God makes sense of our own personal experiences. Atheism doesn't.